Nicola. Fantastic. Mega. All right, cool. Okay, well, thank you so much for finding the time to come and listen to this talk today. I'll introduce myself in a moment, but I'll just give a little bit of context as to what I was planning to talk about this afternoon. So I do a lot of training and outreach work around digital sustainability, so helping people understand what sustainability means in its broadest context, and also how digital can fit within that realm. And Yana said to me, oh, it'd be really interesting if you could come and give a talk that focused a lot on case studies and actually really sort of highlighted some interesting things that you think are out there that might give people some ideas. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to give you a little bit of kind of context as to what a fossil-free internet actually is. It may not be what you might think it is. So let's see if we can bust a few myths there. And then I'll spend a bit of time on case studies too. And I'm super, super happy to be interrupted as we go. So if anybody has any questions or wants me to clarify something or wants to add an idea or suggestion in, I'm really, really down with this. I think this is such a massive topic. I don't profess to know all the answers or have all the things at my fingertips. And I very, very usually find that crowdsourcing a bit of knowledge around these things can make a session really far more interesting and engaging as well. So feel free, if you wish, to jump in. So I'm going to talk to you about moving towards a fossil-free internet. And let me just introduce myself to you a little more formally. So my name is Hannah. Hannah Smith. Good luck finding me on social media. I possibly have the world's most very common name. I work at the Green Web Foundation. So I run the training and operations at the Green Web Foundation. The Green Web Foundation is a non-profit, and our mission is all about moving the internet towards being fossil-free by 2030. And I'll tell you a little bit more about us in a bit, because I think it does fit into the kind of case study mission that I've been given for this afternoon. So that's me with my little pooch Lily. I live in the southwest of England in a national park called Exmoor National Park, which is full of trees, rivers and sea. It's a pretty cool place, actually. Very lucky to live here. Aside from working at the Green Web Foundation, I also run a meetup community called Green Tech Southwest. It's based in the southwest of the UK. Our events are always online, and if the timings work for you, anyone is super welcome to join. We talk about the good and the bad of sustainable tech. So we talk about positive impacts that tech can make, but we also talk about the negative impacts as well. So try and make it a really rounded kind of set of discussions around that. And actually, funnily enough, our next meetup is tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about carbon-aware software. And that is one of my case studies. So if you like this bit on carbon-aware software and you want to find out a bit more about it, more nerdy details, you might want to come along tomorrow. And the events are free. It's a volunteer-run community. I'm also very involved in it with a community called climateaction.tech. I don't know if we have any cats here. I know some of you are cats. That's what we call ourselves at climateaction.tech. I mention this community because if you're interested in getting to know like-minded people who are interested in taking action on climate with tech, CAT is a really, really useful community. It's about 7,000 people across the world. It's free to join. And I mean, gosh, I could spend a whole half an hour talking about how much that community has given me in terms of learning about this stuff. So I can't speak about it highly enough. And then just a tiny bit of kind of context for me, so you maybe know a little more about my background. So my background is in computer science. So I have a BSc in computer science. Not that it's really relevant much anymore, because when I did my degree, the internet was only just a thing. So yeah, a lot of what we learned was language compilers and programming in C and stuff like that. But still, I have a technical background, so I'm quite happy to get nerdy with anyone who wants to. And for the last 7 years before joining the Green Web Foundation, I was working as a freelance WordPress developer, working with SMEs. So had a lot of experience of understanding how organizations actually want to use tech and some of those conflicts that we have around providing a good digital experience for someone, but then also balancing some of these sustainability concerns as well. So I'm going to start with something. Oops, I'm going to click on a link and lose you all. Ah, damn. Hang on. There we are. Okay, let me try that again. I'm going to start with quite a sort of bold phrase. Some of you might have heard this talked about before in this term, in this way. At the Green Web Foundation, we talk about the internet being the world's largest coal-powered machine. It's responsible for between 2.1 and 3.9 of global greenhouse gas emissions globally. And because our electricity generation is largely powered by fossil fuels, the internet by association also becomes powered by fossil fuels. And the kind of thing that's interesting or crazy, depending on sort of how perhaps positive you're feeling on a certain day, is that it really doesn't need to be. We can transition the internet to be fossil free a little bit quicker. And one of the things that I wanted to do, this afternoon was talk to you about what we mean by fossil free. And I gave you a hint already around this at the beginning of the call, around what fossil free actually might mean. So yeah, our mission is to be fossil free by 2030. Now, one of the things about the internet and moving something to fossil free is that many people will assume that fossil free is simply thinking about energy use and about decarbonizing the way that the internet runs. And yes, when we talk about being fossil free at the Green Web Foundation, that is a very important part of it. We do talk about decarbonizing the internet. And the way that we phrase that specifically is that what we want to see from a decarbonized internet is that for every unit of energy used to build and run the internet, we can point to 1 unit less coming from fossil fuels globally. So this isn't about still burning loads of energy. This is about actually reining it all back in and being able to see things shrink. But the other really, really important thing, and the thing that I'm really passionate about, is this idea of a social foundation as well. And the idea that a fossil-free internet is something that respects people's right to a social foundation. I'm curious, does anybody here, does that term social foundation resonate with many people here around the room? It's a concept from donut economics. Yeah, Tim, I thought you might have heard of it. I'd be a bit worried if you didn't. Thumbs up. Anybody else? No, maybe it's a new concept. Okay. So the social foundation is a concept that comes from, well, as I mentioned, donut economics. It talks about the set of things that humans need in order to thrive, not just survive. And that's really, really important when we talk about sustainability, because you can kind of fall into a trap of thinking about sustainability as being something that meets people's basic needs of food, water, shelter, and kind of leaving it at that. But actually, what we want as a sustainable society is to meet these extra needs of people, such as providing education, social equity, peace and justice, and actually providing access to networks. And that brings us very firmly into the realm of digital. Digital, when we think about networks, we might think about in real life community, but we might also think about the internet as well as a right, as a social foundation that we want to provide to people. And at the Green Web Foundation, when we talk about a fossil-free internet, we do think decarbonised internet plus this social foundation. And the way that we talk about this is we talk about it in this way. We say the systems and power structures that control the internet are visible to all and hard-coded to respect and empower the rights of all humans to thrive, whether they are users of the internet or not. So there's a little bit more in our definition of a fossil-free internet than just thinking about energy usage. There are also these questions around what is the internet for and what harm are we doing by accident or sometimes on purpose to the rights of people to thrive. Now, I've only got half an hour, so I just kind of wanted to sort of float that in front of you as a a thought provoker, as something for you to think about. And if you're interested in learning more about this or unpacking this a little bit more, drop me a line and I can share some other resources with you. But I wanted to get across to you is that a fossil-free internet is one that is decarbonised, but one that is decarbonised in a just and equitable way. So we took another way of kind of imagining this is thinking about if we displace, dismantle and divest from fossil fuels, we can replace, reimagine and invest in the social foundation. So we can remove resource from one and push it to a more equitable use of the internet. We do talk about this in detail. I'm not going to read this slide out to you or go through this in detail. And as Yanis said, I will share the slides with you. So you're very welcome to take a look at this and look through these definitions of what we think of as a decarbonised internet and a social foundation in relation to these different layers of the tech stack. And I'd love to pick up a conversation or kind of hear how people respond to these ideas in here. But a social foundation is very much about equity of access and about equity of ownership, as much as it is about giving people access in the first place. Okay, cool. So I'm going to focus on case studies, but I just kind of wanted to set the scene with those ideas for you. And say, well, why do we focus on digital? Why at the Green Web Foundation have we been set up to focus on this topic? One of the main reasons, and I'm guessing you're all here because you all know this already, is that digital does actually have an impact on the environment around us. Many people still think digital has no impact, and that mindset does need to change. If you look at the impact of in real life activities versus digital, a digital substitute, it's night and day. There's no denying that. In that a digital alternative of an in real life activity will have a lot less carbon emissions associated with it. So digital really can empower our social foundation and be a really big force for good. The internet is also a really well-funded and pervasive infrastructure. It's everywhere. And it's been really good around driving change around this adoption of renewables. So some of the big players in corporate tech, the Googles and Microsofts of this world, have been big pushes for getting more renewables on the grid and getting them adopted and getting people talking about it. And the internet's also been really good at around driving change around digital rights education, so helping people learn how digital and these social foundations work with each other. And of course, the other really cool thing is if we can move the internet to be fossil-free a little bit faster, we can help other sectors learn from our approaches and also help accelerate their own efforts too. There's a really interesting slide deck and training course that's just come out from the UN ENP, I think the Environment Programme. It's a 3-hour course put out by them, which is all about showing how digital tech can be a force for good in sustainability. To my point about using tech to replace in real life activities and how much savings we can get from that. And it does also have some cautionary tales about not using digital tech wastefully. So that's interesting too. I'm going to just explain how digital creates emissions in one slide in a few short sentences so that hopefully this will provide a little bit of context for some of the examples I'm going to show. The examples that I'm going to show do lend themselves to the decarbonisation side of our fossil-free definition. So they are very much focused on carbon emission reduction. I wanted to keep it simple. We've only got half an hour. And I think some of these case studies are very inspiring. I also think the decarbonisation side of things is a really nice entry point into learning and journeying on this stuff. So there's two key ways that digital creates emissions, two key things that we need to be aware of. Emissions arise from creating the energy needed to manufacture digital devices and infrastructure. So that manufacturing point can often far outweigh the actual usage of a device over its life. And I mentioned as well that usage point as well. So when we're thinking about a fossil-free internet, we do also need to take into account the infrastructure that we're creating, the data centers that we're building, the phones that we're creating, and the laptops that we're buying as well. It's that manufacturing side of things that often gets lost in the conversation around decarbonisation. And most people will understand that you switch your phone on, you're using energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. And that's the usage side of the equation. In retrospect, I probably should have popped this slide at the end, but it's here now, so I'll put it in. But we all need an inspirational quote around this kind of stuff. I'm sure many of you will have heard of Helen Keller. She was quite a woman. She was both deaf and blind, and managed to show the world that disability is not necessarily something that would hold you back. She did a lot of really fantastic work around disability advocacy. And I particularly love this quote from her, and I find this so relevant to our domain of digital and digital sustainability. So she talks about the world is moved along not only by the mighty shoves of its heroes, but also by the aggregate of the tiny pushes of each honest worker. I find that very helpful because sometimes you might be thinking, well, what are my efforts in comparison to the likes of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, etc.? I'm a small agency, I'm 50 people, I'm 100 people. And I think this sums it up really, really well, that if we're all working in unison, all finding ways to make our small impacts, we can make a really big difference. So let's talk about some of these case studies then. Hopefully that's given you a little bit of context to set the scene. Let's talk about these case studies. So who's out there working towards fossil free? Well, actually, loads of people are. It may seem like a fringe thing, but actually, we've got plenty of data to show that that's not a fringe thing. And the first thing I wanted to do, and I hope you don't mind that the first case study I'm using is our work from the Green Web Foundation, but I thought it rather illustrated the point quite nicely. We have a number of tools that allow people to start thinking about decarbonising their tech. One of those tools that we have is something called the Green Web Check. So we hold a data set which holds information about all the hosting companies and whether they're running on renewable energies or not. So those data centers and hosting companies submit their information to us, along with the range of IP addresses that they use, and then anybody can check again their hosting against that data set and find out whether that hosting company is 100% renewable or not. That's, by the way, our definition of green. It is powered 100% by renewable energy, and they have to evidence that to us. So our data set, you can run automated checks against that data set to check the hosting of any website URL. We get 3.5 million daily hits on that data set. So that tells me that there are a lot of people out there wanting to find out the greenness of their hosting. And Tim is the author of one such tool that runs automated checks against our data set. That tool is EcoGrader, which is, by the way, absolutely fantastic. And I love your new version of it, Tim. Yeah, it's awesome. And I share that with people all the time as a great tool for checking the greenness of any website. So we have a Green Web Check tool. Loads of people are using it. If you're not a developer, you might prefer to use the manual version of our tool, which is, again, we call it the Green Web Check, but it's the manual version. You can go on our website, pop in any URL, and find out whether that is hosted green or not. And we get 9,000 people popping onto our website using that page every month. So again, that tells me that there are lots and lots of people out there wanting to find the answers to these questions and wanting to play their part moving to fossil free. And then the other cool tool that we have is that we have our green hosting directory. Our green hosting directory is a repository of information that you can interrogate if you're looking to find a green hosting company. So I should imagine quite a lot of people use our Green Web Check tool, or perhaps use a tool like Tim's EcoGrader and go, oh no, my hosting's not green. Then what do? Well, what you do is you might come to our hosting directory and find an alternative supplier that you could move to. And that directory, we see 2,000 uses of that a month. Now that tells me something. That tells me that there are lots of people out there thinking about this topic and trying to make change and trying to shift their supply chain to be more sustainable, or to at least to run on green energy. So I think that's cool. We've got a new version of the hosting directory coming out in February, and a lot of funding applications in there at the moment to start building some of these concepts of the social foundation into that tool as well. So we want to start being able to surface information about not just the energy that they use, but also things like their wider sustainability policies, who they're owned by, what their shareholder agreements are, and what their management practices are as well. So watch this space for that tool to hopefully explode to be a real, true fossil-free hosting directory. Cool. So I wanted to share that with you. There's some really interesting tools there, loads of people using them, and I'm hoping some of you are familiar with those tools as well. Another inspiring example of something that is happening in this fossil-free internet world is Branch Magazine. And this is something that we've developed in collaboration with climateaction.tech. Now, the really cool thing about Branch Magazine is it's a website. The website itself is full of really, really interesting and inspiring content. It's all about creating a just and sustainable internet for all. But what's really cool about it is the fact that depending on the amount of renewables on the grid in the UK on a given day, you may see a different version of that website. So if we have, I don't know how familiar people are with grid and carbon intensity, so I'll just give a kind of few sentences overview of it. When the grid is running clean, it will mean that there are lots of renewables being generated on that day. So for example, the sun might be shining and we've got lots of solar power generation, or the wind might be blowing strong. And that's certainly something we get a lot of in the UK, and that will be generating lots of wind power. And what that will do is reduce the carbon intensity of the grid. It means that there's more clean power on the grid, or more power is being generated. No, let me try that saying that. Fewer carbon emissions are generated in order for that power to exist. So those are good days, and we would call those low grid intensity days. And on low grid intensity days, you will get a fuller experience on the Branch Magazine site. And on a day where perhaps the sun isn't shining and we're burning lots of coal for our power, you will get a more stripped back version of that site. Now, we call this a carbon aware website. And I've got a couple of other examples to share with you here as well. They're actually not as hard as you might think to code. What you can do is there's plenty of data you can get through various APIs to figure out what's going on in the grid. And using some software development techniques, often revolving around JavaScript, you can present a different experience to people depending on what energy is available. So on a high intensity grid day, you won't see all of the images loaded automatically into that website. You'll see a placeholder for the image, and you'll actually have to click in order to view that image. Now, I know for some marketing sites, that's perhaps not something that is practical for you to do, but this is an interesting thought piece in order to inspire people to think perhaps slightly differently about how we use the internet and what our expectations of the internet, and also what is possible that we could do if we started to think a little bit more about what power is on the grid. So I do recommend check out Branch Magazine. And I think today we're on a high carbon intensity day. I checked it a bit earlier, so you'll see a blue background, and you'll see that those images aren't loading in automatically. You have to click them in order to see them. And I should say that there's a middle intensity as well. The middle intensity is that the images do load, but they're grayed out and quite pixelated. So that means that the images are smaller to transfer across the wire. So there is a field out here of thinking about different user experiences depending what's on the grid. I'll tell you about another example verbally as well. There's a website that's powered entirely by renewables, by solar panel. I believe it's based in Barcelona in Spain. And basically that is run, I think, off a Raspberry Pi that's connected up to some solar. And if that sun is not shining enough that day in order to power that website, you can't access it. And that's another really interesting idea around what's possible. We've got to change a lot of mindsets if we're to become sustainable. This idea of everything being on demand all the time, there's 24/7 access, this 24/7 readiness is something we might have to be willing to address if we're truly to move towards a fossil-free internet.
So Hannah, I just want to give a heads up that we're running out of time.
Yeah, I know, I'm terrible. I'm always chatting too long. I was about to ask you, Yanis, how long have I got left?
Very little time, but hey, let's go through the slides, the end of the deck, and see what more you have in stock for us, and we can go into like some sports activities. We can go into overtime.
Well, I don't have too many more slides, and I've talked through a few of the best examples already. Okay, cool. Thanks, Yanis. You're very, very understanding. So Organic Basics is another website. This is an example of an e-commerce website that has been built to be performant and efficient. Actually, this is, as I mentioned, an e-commerce site. One of the key things they've done in this site is actually, instead of having pictures of all of their products, they have illustrations that have been done in a very clever file format, so they're nice and small and condensed. They've also done a really, really good write-up about this website and about these concepts of building a low-impact website. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this website is not carbon aware in the same way that Branch is, so you will get the same experience each day when you visit, but it's been specifically designed to be really, really low impact and small and light. And then there is a full version of the site as well. Now, I think for something like what they're selling, or basic clothing, so vests, t-shirts, pants, this kind of thing, that actually is a model that really works, especially if you're, replacing your stocks as well. So, socks, you have to buy a few times a year, don't you? One of Yanis's member at Boy & Company, the European University Institute, so some of you might have met Francesco Marano. He worked with us at the Green Web Foundation to assess the carbon emissions of simply redesigning their website's content. So not changing platform, not changing hosting, simply just thinking about their content in a different way. They're quite a high traffic website. I think, we're talking about 100,000 kind of hits a month sort of thing. It's a decent traffic website. But actually, we estimated using the Sustainable Web Development estimation model that they saved about 4.6 tons of CO2 simply by rationalizing their content and using less images and using better image formats. And it really was as simple as that. It was an education piece for the team, for them to learn about the impacts these things make and implementing those things. So it was something the content team was able to do, and then also produced a better, more usable website as well. And that's one of those, crossovers with the social foundation too. A better usable, more performant website also is good for our social foundations. So I wanted to share that as a really great example. You don't have to be a techie developer, and you don't have to sort of start messing around with your supply chain in order to make some quite big impacts. I mean, 4.6 tons of CO2 over the course of a year is really pretty massive saving for a website. And then one other example, I'll share this one briefly because Yanis, I'm taking on board what you're saying about times. There's some really interesting resources that have come out of the UK government as well. They are doing quite a lot to push forwards ICT sustainability, not just thinking about the usage of tech, but also thinking about the purchasing of tech. So devices, hardware, laptops, phones, and really thinking about new ways to do that. And what I've shared here is a link to a spreadsheet that you can use. If you can get some bits of data, you can plug it all in and get some CO2 emissions. And I've seen some really, really cool examples from NHS Digital, which is our national health system, that have taken this model and really, really run with it. They've also developed some really interesting checklists as well. So that's worth having a look at. And last but not least, I will very quickly talk about this concept, which is carbon-aware software, which I touched on a little bit already. If you're looking for some interesting ideas and interesting new applications of how we can build carbon-aware software, I would strongly recommend having a look at the Green Software Foundation, that's GSF, the Green Software Foundation's hackathon, which they ran just this autumn. The idea was developers were tasked with using a carbon-aware software development kit and to come up with new ways of moving processing load to different locations or different times of day, depending on what was coming up on the grid. And that's something called carbon-aware software. So Branch is an example of that. But what we're looking at here is stuff much more at an infrastructure level. So there's some really, really interesting work, and really hope that some of those are actually going to become implemented solutions that any of us can use as well. Okay. And then last thing I would say, as I can't talk about digital sustainability and digital waste without giving Jerry McGovern a little mention as well. If there are any organisations here who are interested in analysing the digital waste that they have within their business, I'll give you an example. 90% of data that is created by an organisation is never used or looked at. That's an example of digital waste. I would definitely recommend taking a look at Jerry McGovern's work. You can follow up these links, and he's got a really nice survey that you can fill out to start to give an organisation an idea of its CO2 impacts and where its opportunities for reducing waste might be. And if anybody's interested in a marketing opportunity or talking about digital sustainability more widely, there is an International Digital Cleanup Day, which is being run on the 18th of March 2023. It's happened in previous years. The idea is to get organisations to look at their operations, to start deleting things. It's for schools, organisations and individuals. And then what they do is they collect all that data and show, hey, look, when we start deleting stuff, this is the kind of impact that we can have. And so I think the Digital Cleanup Day is a really, really nice opportunity. So, Yannis, I'm done. Thank you everyone for listening to some examples.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Your enthusiasm is really, really nice. Good to hear, and it spreads also through teams, so it's amazing. Good to see that we have more role models that are leading compared to when we spoke last. So I think that's really, really good. Any closing brief comments, feedback, reflections? You'll get the slides. You'll get. I'll share also my notes, links to all of this. Thank you so much, Hannah. We did it almost right on time, but thank you for sharing, and thanks also for those beautiful plants in the background. That looks great. And stay safe, and hope to see all of you in person once we've arrived safely in 2023.